Hey everybody, Nick here, and today I got a review for you of this little guy right here. This is the TJ Schwarz Overland fixed blade knife. First off though, before I go any further, I gotta let you know that TJ Schwarz actually sent this little guy my way for a review. He reached out to me, said, "Hey Nick, doing a line of custom fixed blades. Would you be interested in checking one of these guys out?" I said, "Yeah, of course." TJ is one of my very favorite designers at this point in time. He's doing amazing work, so I'm very interested in seeing what he's doing, even if fixed blades is sort of outside my normal purview. But I told him, as always, I'm gonna talk about the good, the great, the bad, and the ugly of it. It might be a gem, it might be junk. He did still send it along. Nonetheless, we do have to assume this is the very best quality controlled one of these guys ever, and I'm doing my best not to let that affect the nature or the quality of my review. Next thing, let's do some size comparison. What we're going to see here is this is a moderately sized fixed blade, right? Here it is against the Spyderco Delica. And so we're going to see here that this is pretty big relative to the Delica. Here it is against the Ontario Rat number 2, and yeah, reasonably big. And then here it is against the Spyderco PM2. And so what we see here is, in terms of overall blade length, it is actually, in terms of sharpened blade length, bigger than the PM2, but overall, not all that different. And in terms of handle length, actually, the PM2 handle is almost exactly the same size as this guy. The contours are a little bit different, but we see here that if a PM2 fits your hand reasonably, then this guy probably will as well. And so what we see here is this is a pretty reasonably sized fixed blade. Then here it is against two other fixed blades that I've talked about in the past. Here it is against the Spyderco Waterway fixed blade. So what we're going to see here is that in terms of sharpened length, very, very similar. Then here it is against the Monterey Bay Knives Field Trekker, which again, in terms of sharpened length, is relatively similar, but it's a very different sort of knife in that way. So there is that. Next thing, this is, as you probably already realizing, this is a fixed blade version of an existing knife, the CRKT Overlander. Well, okay, I guess it's the Schwarz Overland. It's been made by CRKT. And so if you're looking at that knife and going, "Oh my God, this looks like a ripoff of it," well, it's because it's from the same designer, right? TJ decided to make a custom fixed blade line out of it because, and frankly, I think it's a good idea to, right? That was a very nice little blade and a nice little design here. And to see it done as a custom seems really nice. And then finally, a note that's sort of some import here. This is a fixed blade knife. Hence no disassembly, of course, because you take out those screws, but you don't really need to, right? It's just a fixed blade knife. But when it comes to actually reviewing it, I am not exactly bare freaking grills over here, right? My idea of game processing involves Factorio on an AMD CPU, and my idea of bushcrafting generally involves wax. So please take this with a grain of salt, right? Maybe an even smaller grain of salt than you take my normal reviews. I've done my best to do some testing with this guy, to do some carry, etc., but in, the relatively urban San Diego, there's sort of a limit to the amount of bushcrafting I'm going to do with this, so keep this as one voice among many. But I want to tell you a little bit about what I'm liking about this guy and what I'm not liking so much about this guy, and then give you some final conclusions. On the good side, start with, this is made by a dude in Idaho, by TJ Schwarz, right? He happens to be one of the better designers in the space at the moment, right? He's got a bunch of collaborations with CRKT. He's also the designer of the Koenig Knives Arius, for what that's worth. But he is a very, very good designer. He's making these in his shop, roughly on his own. He's doing the heat treat through Peter's Heat Treat and whatnot. But this is sort of slotting into that space between custom knife and production knife, right? And so, in a lot of ways, I don't know whether this is a custom. I don't know whether this is a production. I gather he's doing all the blade grinding by hand because he's got YouTube videos of it doing. But at the same time, yeah, so it's sort of a custom-ish knife. All of them look roughly the same, but they're all customizable. I don't know what to call this thing. But either way, it's being made by a dude in Idaho, and that can be a beautiful thing. Supporting a small maker is a great thing. Next thing, price-wise. Price on this guy is fine. You're looking at $260 for the knife here is configured. You're looking at an additional $40 for the sheath here, which is great. That's not cheap. I want to be very clear about that. That is not a particularly cheap knife, but at the same time, this is a knife that is customizable, that has really nice materials, and the comparable kind of knives, like the Bradford Guardian 4, Bach River, that kind of thing, made in the US kind of fixed blades and high-end materials, are in the same rough ballpark here. So I'm going to go with fine on the price. Could it be cheaper? Yeah, probably. Could it be more expensive? Maybe, but it's fine, right? That's where I'm going to leave it there. Next thing. I really do like the maker's mark on this guy. You can see here that the entire knife has somewhat of a stonewash finish, but then you've got this little maker's mark in there. Sorry, it's got some stuff on there from actually used the thing. But anyways, you got a nice little maker's mark on there, and you get lots of nice little details sort of overall, but I do appreciate that very much. It looks good, and I think it's very subtle, and it fits nicely in that contour there, which also, by the way, works well with a pinching style grip, if that's a kind of approach that you're looking to take here. That works too. I also like very much the micarta on this. The micarta on this knife is quite excellent, right? So what we see here is it is an actual micarta. There are definitely micartas out there in the world that kind of feel like they're just massive chunks of resin with a little cloth mixed in there in the middle sometimes, whereas this really feels like a very solid micarta. And you can also see that there's a lot of work that's been done to it, right? So you can see here that he's chamfered the micarta at the edges of the knife in all of the relevant places, so that even though the knife itself is slightly shadow boxed, you don't really feel that, meaning that the line is actually stopped before the edge of the knife, but you don't really feel that much. More importantly, well, not more importantly, but you also see that same chamfering around the screws as well as around the lanyard hole, which is very nice. And it's also worth noting that there are equivalent chamfers on the blade on the blade material itself, right? So you see there's a chamfer here and here. As a result, this ends up feeling very, very round, even though it is in practice just a series of things sandwiched together. So I do think the micarta work is very, very nice, and those little chamfers, the little milling here, makes this feel very conscious. It makes it feel very designed. So I appreciate that. Next thing, the blade shape on this guy is good. It is a sheep's foot style blade, I think one could probably argue, right? Because it's not a straight edge on the bottom there, but it has some of the benefits of a Wharncliffe blade for cutting and dragging like that. You get some belly here, and you also have the advantage of the blade is being substantially below the handle, meaning that when I grab this guy with my fingers here, I can still press the entirety of the blade against a table, against a cutting board, which is going to make this a little bit more workable in some kinds of cutting relative to a fixed blade where, for instance, you are, this is a good example, relative to a fixed blade like this Field Trekker here, where your fingers are going to be way below the edge of the blade here. You can't really come straight down onto a surface. So I do like that approach for some kinds of things. This is going to be much better in the kitchen than a lot of equivalent fixed blade knives or pocket knives because of that angle. So that's nice. I also do very much appreciate the sheath on this guy. This has a nice sheath to it. So I ordered this sheath in this configuration with the grommets here, with the green, etc. It is a pancake-style Kydex. You can see it's made of two different pieces, as opposed to a taco-style Kydex, which looks like this, where there is just one piece that's kind of wrapped around. But it is a pancake-style Kydex with these very nice little holes on there, which I imagine would allow you to fashion a drop leg, sheath if you wanted to out of it. Right, that's nice. It has a drain hole down here at the bottom in case you get the piece wet and then put it back in the sheath. You can drip dry out of there, which is good. And it also has a very nice thumb ramp right over here for extraction. So when I pop this guy in, what I can do is just put my thumb right against here and then just yeet the sheath off using my thumb itself. In practice, this is going to be on your belt, of course, and so you're not going to feel that, but this just makes it easier, so that way you're not yanking to pull the knife out. You're able to, in a much more controlled manner, kind of push the sheath away from the knife as you're extracting the knife, and that's a really nice thing. This little ramp here is a detail, but it's a very important one. And it's one that I definitely miss on a lot of pieces, like, for instance, on the Spyderco Waterway. Actually, no, they did go up here, right? But if you get a sheath that doesn't have that, it always drives me a little nuts. So it's a good sheath. And by the way, it also does have a Tech-Lock style clip on here. That may be an option, but either way, this has the Tech-Lock style clip, which is able to be oriented either vertically or horizontally, and which snaps into place, right? So you can put this guy, for instance, slide this behind your belt, and then snap the knife on without taking your belt off, which can be a very nice little detail. So I'm a big fan of the clip on here. I think it works quite well. So that's good. Next thing, this is a very rust-resistant knife. The steel here is CPM MagnaCut, which is a very new steel developed by Laren Thomas, which has been making a lot of waves in the knife world, but it is a steel that is actually remarkably rust-resistant, at least according to a lot of the testing we're seeing in the community. The next place this is going after this review is actually in the shower to double-check that, right? But this is actually a steel that is rust-resistant enough that Spyderco is now going to be using it in their salt lineup going forward, which is a very, very nice thing. So if the test test results are to be believed, this could actually be the oversea as well. So that's good. Next thing, this guy is very simple, right? There are 3 screws here. There's a couple of pivot collars around the screws, which is nice, and it's then some micarta and a chunk of steel. There's not a whole lot to go wrong with it, right? That is one of the big benefits of a fixed blade knife. People are always asking me, Nick, what's the strongest locking mechanism ever? This one, where it's a single chunk of metal, right? So if you're looking for a very simple cutting tool that you can really beat on, this is actually going to be a much better choice than a lot of your folding knives out there. So the simplicity of a good fixed blade is a beautiful thing. Next thing, this is very configurable. So I configured it in this way because, frankly, I just found this to be the most attractive set of combinations. The thing is, you can get the handle in a bunch of different colors of G10 as well as micarta. You can get these handle screws either done in silver, as they are here, or in black. You can get these little collars around the handle screws. In this case, I went for a gold kind of look, but you can also get them in silver and black. You can get the blade either done with the stonewash, as I have it here, or with a black or tan Cerakote. You're also able to choose your sheath. You can either go with a Kydex version like this, or which is made, by the way, in-house by TJ, or with a pancake-style sheath. With a leather-style sheath. This is the pancake-style sheath, both of which are going to be $40. So, that's very nice, actually. And the fact that you can get this in different colors, different screws, means you can make your Overlander very, very different than your buddies, than anybody else's, right? That is a level of customizability that is not all that common these days, especially in relatively, available kinds of pieces. And I really appreciate that TJ is going the extra mile to allow people to say, yeah, I want mine with red and black screws, etc. That's kind of awesome, right? And it's very nice that it's nice that that's a thing. There's so much of production stuff these days is non-customizable, and so little actual customizable custom is going on that to have that there and not at a massive price premium is great. Then finally, on the good side, and the thing that is absolutely best about this, what would be the great if this weren't a quick review, 11 minutes in, whoops, is the blade on this guy is awesome. It is CPM MagnaCut steel, which is a steel that has a lot of hype right now. I'm going to admit that freely, but in my testing, it's deserving of that hype, right? This is MagnaCut, and it's been heat-treated well. It's been done by Peter's Heat Treat, according to TJ's website, and he's targeting 61 to 62 Rockwell, which is great. But more importantly, it comes down to a very nice thin edge, right? It's not the, oh my God, thinnest edge you've ever seen, but for a fixed blade, oh yeah, that's very nice. This will absolutely cut, right? And it comes down to a nice thin grind. It has a nice tall grind, and then the stock itself is not, oh my God, thick either. And as a result, this cuts like crazy. I took this downstairs and I did a bunch of testing with it just to put it through its paces, right? This is my first time really spending a lot of time with a big chunk of MagnaCut, right? And so I cut up a bunch of cardboard. And then I did some whittling in some relatively hard wood. And then I did a bunch more cardboard. And I did a couple of other things. I'm trying to remember what else I cut. But, just a lot of random stuff around. Basically anything I could cut, I did. And then I was still able to cut copy paper with it afterwards. And that was actually very impressive to me, right? I'm not saying it's, oh my God, so much better than everything. But the thing is, this very, very much performed. And then I took it back upstairs and I stropped it back up again. And it was ridiculously sharp again. This is a very high performance cutting tool. In my estimation, frankly, this blade outperformed me. I got bored of testing by the time this blade wanted to yield. And I think that there were lots of steels out there in the world that would have not had a great time with that testing. So to me at least, this is a very high performance blade. I am duly impressed. I want to, of course, continue to see more and more actual community testing. It's done in a standardized way that's not by a jackass in a Batman mask in his garage. Wasn't actually wearing the mask at that point, but still, that's a beautiful thing. So to me at least, what is great about this guy is the blade, which is made of a very nice steel, done well, and ground just beautifully to a nice thin cutting edge. So this is a really great blade, and to me, all that's the good. It's got a great blade, it's very configurable, very simple, rust resistant, with a nice sheath, nice micarta work, a nice blade shape, a good maker's mark, and the price is fine, and it's made by one dude in Idaho. On the bad side, to start with, it is not a particularly wide handle on this guy. Just to kind of give you a sense of comparison, this is only marginally thicker than a Spyderco PM2 in terms of its overall thickness here. If you are a person who tends to prefer a much thicker and rounder handle, then this may not actually be super satisfying to you. That's going to be a thing, right? I wouldn't actually mind maybe a little bit more in the way of palm swell here. I think that might be a little bit more comfortable, but at the same time, it works. Ergonomically, it's fine. Oh, I don't know if I mentioned the balance, but the balance on this guy is really great. I should have up there at some point in time, but yeah, it's a very nicely balanced knife, and overall it was nice in my hand. One other area where I'd like to see a slight ergonomic improvement would actually be to expand this choil just a little bit more. With my fingers, which given my hands are smaller than most, this actually worked great. I can kind of rest my index finger up here, and even if you've got bigger fingers, if you kind of have the finger hanging off the back here, but if you made this just a little bit bigger, I feel like it would be more accommodating to a number of people, as well as a little bit easier to get everything seated up in there. But this makes for a very, very secure grab. You can also grip it down here, which works fine, and you can do a more conventional hammer grip as well. But at the same time, in a saber grip choked up, this worked pretty well, but I'd like to see this cut out just a little bit more there. Next thing, on the sheath itself. So this is not a big deal, but it is something to keep in mind. If you look at this sheath, it's going to be very easy for you to at first blush, so hey, I can hang this in a bunch of different angles too. In practice, the spacing between here and here is the same as the spacing between here and here, but the diagonal spacing, because of how geometry works, is different, right? And I've seen sheaths that actually have 3 holes, one that fits this distance and one that fits this distance, which makes it so that you can hang at angles, but oh there. This guy is not one of them. Is it that the end of the world? No, not particularly. And I think for most people, one of the vertical or horizontal is going to be the play, but it is definitely, that's a thing. The other thing that's worth noting is that unlike a lot of the taco-style sheaths, where the clamp is sort of mounted directly to the perforations along the side here, this is sort of on top, and as a result, there is a solid, oh, let's actually go ahead and measure it. There is a very solid centimeter or so of distance between the start of the clip and the actual blade here. So as a result, this sticks a little bit further off the belt than a lot of things do, versus had he, for instance, mounted the clip down here, so it was flush to the blade. It would have been a little bit nicer, would have been a little closer, that is, to the blade itself. So this has a slightly further out center of gravity, basically, as you're carrying it on there. So there is that. Next thing, and by the way, the other thing that's worth noting, this is a little detail, but actually, when you take these screws out, there is a pair of Chicago screws that this is going into, but I noticed that when I tried to re-screw it in there, they had actually kind of fallen down into the sheath itself. So what I had to do is press my finger, like stick my finger up here and kind of press those up, while at the same time screwing with my other hand here, screwing that together. So it's not a big deal, but it might be nice if those were a little bit more locked in place. Next thing, this guy has a little bit of jimping. Well, it has actually substantial jimping right here under the thumb. I'll kind of zoom in and show you what you're looking at here. But as you are gripping this guy, and as I was gripping it, you've got these little jimps here, and this gives you a bunch of texture, right? You are at no risk of sliding further up the blade as you're doing so, but the thing is, in actually doing a whole bunch of cutting with it and going through a whole bunch of cardboard, I definitely did feel this digging into the thumb after a little while. If you have calluses or if you're wearing gloves, it's a complete non-issue. But at the same time, this is just maybe a little bit sharper than I might like. There's a benefit to having a much more kind of high-frequency jimping, for lack of a better term, where you get more jimps per inch, because that's going to feel a lot more like a consistent pattern rather than these widely spaced things, which feel a little bit spikier. Then finally, on the bad side, the sheath on this guy does have very strong retention. I don't know that that's necessarily a bad thing, right? You know, in a lot of cases that could be great. But in practice, occasionally pulling this guy out of the sheath, because there's not all that much texture along here, I did find myself kind of slipping off, right? And a lot of other designs have a little bit more something that helps you grab on. Like, you know, this guy expands a little bit as you go further out, so that makes it a little easier to kind of grab on, and it has a lot less retention, too, for what it's worth. So I ended up using the thumb ramp a whole bunch, kind of leaning into that, but I would have kind of appreciated maybe a little tiny bit of higher frequency jimping someplace in this area here or someplace back here, just to make it a little bit easier to grab and pull it the rest of the way out there, because you're already going to have to to kind of move forward and choke up. But I think that little extra something, or maybe even another approach, I don't know. But at the same time, I would have appreciated something that makes it a little easier to pull this guy out of there. That could have been a very nice thing. So to me, all of that is the bad, is that the sheath has very strong retention, and there's not all that much grabbability back here to get to. The jimping under the thumb here is a little bit much and can be painful with long-term repeated cutting. There are no angled mountings on the sheath, just horizontal and vertical, and the sheath does stick out a fair bit from the blade because of the way he's done things here. I'd like to see a slightly bigger cutout here for larger fingers, although this works great for me. And it is not a particularly wide blade in the handle here, so if you like a lot of palm swell here, you're not going to get it here. Final conclusion, though, honestly, I'm very impressed. This is a very nice little fixed blade here. And there's a lot to love about it, because it's made by a great designer. It's at a fine price with good ergonomics, a nice blade, nice micarta and handle work, a nice sheath, very strong rust resistance, simple construction, a bunch of configuration options, and a blade that is just really good at cutting things. The handle isn't all that thick. I'd like to see a slightly bigger cutout here. The sheath does vertical or horizontal, but that's about it. The jimping onto the thumb is a little aggro for me, and the sheath has strong retention, but not quite enough texture to facilitate pulling it out of there. But overall, I gotta say, I'm pretty impressed, right? Fixed blade reviews in a lot of ways are a little weird for me. Generally speaking, I do folding knives, right? Because there's sort of less going on in a fixed blade. The spotlight ends up being almost entirely on the blade and on the edge, right? This part here is just a life support system for this over here. And the thing is, in this case, that works out because that's where this knife is most impressive. The combination of Magna Cut, which seems to be performing very, very well here, good edge geometry, good heat treat, and then all of that together with a very strong support system. The handle, the sheath, the overall design are pretty damn solid. As well as the customizability of this guy, customizability, that's how that word is pronounced. All of that makes this actually very, very impressive. With all of those things considered, but most of all, that performance of the edge and the custom nature of the build, that you can make this whatever you want it to be, I do consider this to be a gem, right? I think this is a very, very good blade and a bunch of other stuff that's also very good in service of that blade. TJ has made a very good knife here, both for cutting as well as otherwise. I think it's also pretty attractive, right? But that's much more a matter of taste here. But it's a good knife that cuts very, very well, that can be made very, very yours, and I think for a lot of people, all of that considered is going to go overland very well. Okay, and they'll certainly want this Schwarz to be with them. But anyways, so there you go. That's my final conclusion. Very, very nice knife with a really, really impressive blade. Good job, TJ. Hope this has been interesting to the rest of you, and have yourselves an absolutely wonderful rest of the day. I figure this review is about over, land. Bye now.